Αρχίζει η δεύτερη συνεδρίαση, όπου τώρα οι ομιλητές θα ανέβουν με την ίδια σειρά για να σχολιάσουν αυτά που είχαν διαβάσει πριν από μήνες και αυτά που άκουσαν τώρα. Δεν θα μακρηγορήσω. Paul, would you please be so kind to have the floor for 10 minutes now, or less, because we are out of schedule, as you know. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I have, ladies and gentlemen, I have 10 minutes to try and pull all this together. All the talks that we've heard this morning, I'm going to try and pull them together into some form of synergy to see how we might go forward. And I want to start with this picture. This is a picture of my library in UCL in the centre of London, just around the corner from the British Library in Euston Road. We are the third oldest university in England, founded in 1826 after Oxford and Cambridge. And when we built our library to support the new university, this is what they wanted it to look like. So remember this picture, because I have another picture at the end. This is what they wanted it to look like in 1826, very much modelled on the British Museum, which contained the original version of the British Library, and the two buildings were built very much at the same time, the beginning of the 19th century. What we've heard today shows that there is no one ideal library model, and indeed what should happen is that services and facilities should reflect local user needs. And I think you've heard from all the presentations how our services are shaped to reflect the local population which they try to serve. But there is one unifying factor in all the presentations when we talk about user need, and that is all of us, in our different ways, from the different sorts of libraries that we are trying to expand the range of things that we do and insert ourselves into the workflow of our users. That could be in the public library service, could be in the university library service, could be in the national library. If you think of all the points that we've made about user satisfaction and user experience, each of the library services here on the panel today is trying to do that, to look at the whole range of what an undergraduate does in terms of learning, what a researcher needs in terms of research resources and research services, and the library then moves into the space. So the library is being proactive and actually reinventing its role in the 21st century to fit the way the user wants to work. And that's because the user is king and not the collection. It's no longer the collection that's at the centre of the library experience. It's the user, and collections are just one of those services that the user is wanting to take advantage of. There are many examples of collaboration and cooperation. You've heard some of them this morning in the presentations, and I've listed some of them here on this slide. I will just mention one, if I may. The open air collaboration is a truly European collaboration, and as someone who voted to stay in the European Union when the rest of my country voted to leave, that's a significant factor for me. My American colleague has just told me that breaking news from the UK today, in the last couple of hours, that our British Parliament has said the Parliament will have a vote on whether we leave the Union or not. It cannot simply be assumed that Brexit will happen. That's fantastic news for me personally, because it's no longer a given that we will leave, because it's not clear that the majority of MPs actually want to leave the Union in the first place. So that's a very exciting development for me, because it shows that there is a well of support for collaboration. And in this slide, through European developments like Open Air, we are developing European collaborations across the continent which will aid our work and our services. What types of hooks can we use in order to develop synergies and collaborations between the different sorts of library models that we have heard from heard of today? Well, I think a common theme in all the presentations was one of innovation. And it's where you innovate and you start doing things differently or doing new things that you can work differently and so work in partnership with people where before you may have seen yourself as being a competitor. And do you remember in my presentation I talked about when we looked at those library league tables and benchmarking statistics, I said these are our competitors. Well, in one sense they are competitors because we're competing for limited resources and space. But we also work with them in big collaborative projects that are our own. We couldn't hope to finance ourselves. So innovation is a driver for this synergy, for working together. And the example I give here is, again, a European one, the European Open Science Cloud. This is a multi-billion euro development being funded by the Commission. I'm on the steering group for the European Open Science Cloud. We're looking for 8 billion euros of public funding, 2 billion from the Commission and 6 billion from the member states to create an internet of open, accessible resources, of things, of stuff that people can access free of charge anywhere in Europe, indeed anywhere in the world, since it's an open science cloud. And we're looking particularly at one of the building blocks as research data. So not necessarily the publication, the book, the article, but also the research data that underpins that publication in the world of the 21st century digital society. You can make not only the publication available, like UCL Press, with an open access publication, you can look at the building blocks, the research data, the raw facts, the figures, the images that make up that publication and share those as well. So the European Open Science Cloud, with this 8 billion euros of funding from the member states and the Commission, is going to be the way that we do that. Philippos has asked for us to suggest improvements on how the library can be managed and developed. And I think one of the emphases in the submissions to the panel today was on looking at this role of collecting. And I've said the collection is no longer king in libraries. It's the user that lies at the centre, and our collecting policies, such as they are, need to reflect the fact that it's the user who dictates what it is that we collect and what it is that we buy. In an open world, the traditional model of copyright deposit libraries falls apart. National libraries are copyright deposit libraries. Oxford and Cambridge in my country are also 2 of the 6 copyright deposit libraries that the UK has. But in an open, if you take the Commission's view that everything should be open access by 2020, then the traditional model of a national library collecting copyright deposit material in their nation state falls apart, because copyright works in a completely different way in an open access environment. And you don't have these barriers that the boundaries of a nation states actually provide in an open access environment. So we really need to rethink what it means to collect if copyright and copyright deposit in the role of a traditional national library no longer applies in an open access world. Let's move on to the final slide. You remember that slide I showed at the beginning of this 10 minutes, the library in 1826? This is the library in 2016. This is one of my 18 libraries. This is the Cruciform Hub. 400-seat digitally enabled 24-hour learning space for our students in central London. There are some books. You can see some books in there. They're at the back of the room. They're not at the front. Who's at the front? The user is at the front, and their digital tools are in front of them. And this is the kind, when we built this space, we asked for student input from our 40,000 students. We said, what sort of library do you want this space to be? We got 1,000 responses from the students. And this, overwhelmingly, was the sort of space that they wanted, a 24-hour, digitally enabled learning space where the default mode of delivery was digital, not paper, and where they could work quietly, but also work noisily in groups if they were working on projects and needed to collaborate. So this room, you might think, is a cacophony of sound. In fact, it's completely quiet. And there are no librarians sitting in this space. The librarians sit outside in the entrance to welcome students in. These spaces are all policed by the students themselves, and their natural way of working in this sort of space is to be absolutely quiet, because that's the kind of space that they want. They don't want it to be a marketplace. They want it to be a learning space where they can use modern tools, but in a traditional, quiet, monastically quiet environment. So this is my conclusion. This is the conclusion that the UCL Council drew up in 1826 when they founded the University of London as the third university in England. And they hoped that it would be a model for innovation and for stability, where students would learn and where that learning would take place in libraries, museums, and all the associated apparatus, as they say here, that goes with that sort of academic support. This is still the vision in UCL in the 21st century as well. I absolutely sign up to the vision of our founding fathers. What I am saying is the tools we use are different, and we deliver it in a different way, but the principles are still the same. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for these short conclusions. Now, Myla, it's
Yes.
your turn.
No,
Comments.
could I address the group from my chair? I don't have any images, but just some general comments, so if that's okay. Yeah, thank you. What I'd like to do is just make a few general comments on some of the papers and then conclude with some other observations. And certainly after first reading and then hearing Yannis's paper on open air, I was so much struck by how many advantages the scientific research communities and information repositories have over those of us in the arts and humanities. Now, first, even though there have been goals met in developing standard vocabularies for describing materials in the arts and humanities, I think we're still very much behind the sciences in large-scale adoption and application. However, that metadata and its shared uses in mainstream applications is really improving. But there's still some reluctance and resistance in sharing data among repositories that have unique holdings. And so the library world is much more advanced in sharing data, whereas the museum world is and still remains somewhat myopic. But again, this is changing. In May, MoMA Library and Archives hosted a large meeting of the IIIF framework, which stands for International Image Interoperability Framework. And it's a new protocol that is helping large digital and visual repositories share data in a much more transparent and easier way. And mainly, I think people are excited about it because you're not giving up access and ownership of your licensed images and the visual repositories, but just making it very much easier to share with your colleagues. And someone at the conference had a good phrase. I think they said this new protocol is like having an awesome, non-destructive pair of scissors. So you'll be able to cut and paste and use images from all over the world for your own kind of edification. Certainly, Paul's comments about the UCL library show a lot of vision in rethinking the space and not calling it a library, but a learning space. And of course, the dilemma of dealing with the number of, the increase in students is always a factor as well. But I liked his phrase when he said that the library is not only a curator and cataloger of knowledge, is no longer a curator and cataloger of knowledge, it's now a creator of knowledge. And I think that that is a phrase that we've heard echoed throughout all of these papers. And certainly both the presentations from Copenhagen Public Libraries and the National University Libraries at Helsinki reflect that kind of forward thinking as they move forward with new buildings and new initiatives. So actually, I'd like to talk about training for just a few minutes. Since there are so many students here in the audience, I'd actually like to know how many of you in the audience are indeed students. Could you raise your hand? Oh, I think there are more of you than that. But anyway, it's very clear to me that there's a trend in the United States, at least, for training of these new generation of information professionals, where now you're not only getting your degree in information studies, but usually accompanying it with a dual master's degree program in another academic discipline. For example, Pratt University in New York has dual master's degree programs in digital arts and history of art and design. The University of Texas at Austin, where I went, has 7 dual degree programs. You can get your master's in library science in addition to a master's of English, Latin American studies, women's and gender studies, Middle Eastern studies, School of Law, global policy studies, and public affairs. And as someone who just recently retired after a 40-year career in museum librarianship, I can encourage you all who are thinking about a career in art in information studies. It's the most satisfying career you could possibly have. And you're always in a lifelong learning situation. You're also a lifelong teaching situation. And libraries are always changing, and you're always at the forefront of that. So if you're thinking about a career path in information studies, certainly when I was in library school, it was very much book and paper based, but now there's so many opportunities to use your degree in this kind of ever-burgeoning world of information and information studies. There's also a changing role of the librarian once you're in your profession. And certainly the librarian now is much more outreach and public service driven across every aspect of the library, as opposed to just limited to straightforward reference reader services or cataloging services. And I found a nice quote by Eric Buckstein, who's the founder and director of DocLab. It's a library services think tank in thought leadership, linking people to collections, where he says, the librarians of today are the media guides of tomorrow. And also, just to summarize the changing role of the research library, there's another think tank based in New York called Ithaca, and they recently, just this summer, issued a report entitled Organizing the Work of the Research Library, and let me quote from that. Research libraries are undertaking a number of radical transformations, from print towards electronic, from local towards shared, from licensed towards open, from general towards distinctive, from collections toward engagement, from selector towards partner. And I think academic library administration is moving away from that old-fashioned siloed approach that distributed collections and responsibilities toward a shared, more transparent, and digital resources enterprise focusing on research and learning through more innovative and engaged research. Thank you.
Thank you, Milo. Thank you very much. Now it's the turn of Yannis Ioannidis to take the floor and make his second round, commenting on the other approaches.
Thank you very much. So from the open air perspective, what synergies we can can set forth among the various types of libraries. Before I go to some conclusions, from the 5 presentations that you've heard, a few facts that we cannot deny. The library model is in flux. A few decades ago, we knew what a library was. Now things are changing. And the key element is and it has been said in multiple ways, that from content-centric, from collection-centric, we're going to people-centric, user-centric. The human user of the services is God, and content is a side effect, in some sense. Still, though, the library remains the guardian of memory, institutional memory, national memory, cultural memory. This is still part of its mission, but it should come, in some sense, hidden, not in the spotlight, the user being in the spotlight. Digital content and services is on the rise. For us, it's complete, 100%, that's it. From zero to anything, it is digital. But any other model of library, the digital presence and the digital element usage inside even the physical building, as you saw in the UCL picture, is that. Now, a library, not open air, but the others, have to balance the resources. How much do you go digital? How much do you go build buildings? Both are needed. Philippos said that. We also have buildings, okay, where they are not beautiful. They are in the dungeon where the servers are running. It's cool there. We need the cooling. So no nice picture about our buildings. We do need buildings. But even in any other model, where do you put your resources? Key thing, and Milan emphasized that at all, training. We need skilled personnel. The new library needs a different kind of librarian. And you need also non-librarians being part in the context of library in order to be able to do effective curation, documentation with the new services. And also, if you look at all the types of libraries, more or less, they have the same types of users who want to extract knowledge, synergize on it, and move forward. But the typology of content that the libraries have is very different, even within a single model of library. And usually, at least in the digital world, where these different types of typologies are captured, they're captured separately. Different department, different unit, and so on and so forth. And this creates silos. And that is fatal, because given that we live in a digital world, even the physical elements have to be brought in together, not different. Is anyone here that is a lawyer? Okay. Nobody likes lawyers. Okay, I can say that now. But we need them for this job. There are a host of legal issues that need to be taken care of. We see the change from license to open and so on. Milan mentioned that. In order for using, reusing, distributing, and in any case, managing and processing the contents of the library, we need to be legal. And we need a different kind of legal thinking, or even coming up with new laws. Exciting for lawyers, necessary for us. So we'll keep them around. New learning approaches. I think the library, in its openness, in its modern concept of openness, becomes a key point, virtual or physical, where learning happens. And I think there is a lot of innovation in the use of even the physical space of the library that can be put ahead and become a learning environment, not just to grab a book and read, but be there, synergize, tell stories. I can go on a lot of that. Openness everywhere, transparency and openness for innovation. We need that. That's kind of self-explanatory. And the other thing is that a challenge. The key library services are non-visible. Geoffrey Bilder said this, that library services are usually invisible, and we only notice them when something goes wrong. I said that in general for infrastructures. Because of this, it's hard, any progress in this, it's hard to justify them financially. And that's a challenge that we need to see how we can go on. So, what can we do in terms of synergies? There's no single library model, you saw that, but the technological and social changes lead to the need for all these types of libraries to sit around a table, identify best practices, and find as much synergy as possible. None of these library types will go away. How do we synergize? Digital skills. I'll quote again. I think this quote is critical for me in any way. The library is not only a curator and cataloger that it was, but it's also now a creator of knowledge. We need roles and jobs for data librarians. The topic of data science is very big. Computer science, now we have data science. Data librarian is a special kind of data scientist. And we need curricula for this, and we need new people that will serve in this role. And creative learning experts. I connect that to, as I said, the library is a learning environment. Common standards. Now libraries are hubs for global information networks. In order to catch this hub notion and this global, you need us, computer scientists, big data technologies, how to analyze the data, to even not just stay with the collection and the content that exists, but create content, create knowledge, and serve that based on the needs of users. And of course, boring stuff in general, but exciting. How do you emphasize openness and how do you emphasize interoperability? And it's not just technical interoperability, it's also legal. If Greece has one legal approach and the UK has another legal approach and Slovenia has another legal approach, these need to interoperate because science and content is global. And finally, innovation and financial models. Libraries, if you think of it, were the first and definitely primary examples of a shared economy. Now, in the new world, we have to capitalize on that and think beyond the traditional concepts of sharing of knowledge that existed because of the environment changing that I mentioned before. We have to adapt the financial models, how we fund libraries, how we invest in libraries, and how the services are provided. Openness is free, but it's not without cost. And the last comment is that because of this, there has to be a coordination of bringing the different types of libraries and align efforts to come up with innovative services. There are low-hanging fruit, digital access, sharing, aggregators, and so on and so forth. We have those, but this is just the beginning. These are the low-hanging fruits. There are wonderful fruits higher up in the tree that we can only find and provide after we collaborate. Open Air, as Paul said, is an example of pan-European and beyond collaboration. The European Open Science Cloud that also Paul mentioned is another very big effort, starting with piloting in a couple of months, but hitting huge numbers. This is the way that I think we should do in general as humanity, and I think the libraries are in a good way for that. Thank you.
Ευχαριστώ πολύ τον Γιάννη Ιωαννίδη για την ανακεφαλαίωση και τα σχόλια. I would like Jacob to take the floor. Here is the table, okay. Your next 10 minutes is yours.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I think some of the words I might have spoken have already been covered. My approach to this task was to build on my previous presentation, but also to try to think how one might approach the idea of an ideal libraries. As I said previously, I think that it's an important fact that libraries is in a competitive environment. It's a different competitive environment for different library types, but anyway, it is a competitive environment. So I used to try to narrow down the areas of collaboration and the ideal library to different models to try to help me think, because, well, models are tools for thinking. One of them is actually one that is used for making strategies in commercial enterprises. It's a very simple model that identifies competitors, customers, and the individual firm. And the place where you would like to be is the unique competing space, because there you have an offering to customers that the competitors do not have, and you use your resources to supply that offering. The idea of the model is, of course, to expand that space, for instance, to cover all the customers. So if you're a library, you might think, who are my competitors? And if you look at the different library models, you might think, what could each of them contribute to this unique space? So that was my thinking. There are some special conditions for public institutions, and I think that's echoed in all the presentations. We have some pressures on our budgets. A guy named Mark Moore has a model called the strategic triangle, and that identifies some specific challenges for public institutions. That model looks like this. He also has an organizational capacity. That could be our collection, or it could be our physical buildings, our digital resources. The organizational capacity generates value, and the value generates legitimacy and support, which gives you money for the organizational capacity. The tricky part, being a public institution, is that value generation does not equal funding. I could hear that in the London case, of course, they're moving in that direction, that the students actually pay for the services, and then you're in the other model. But anyway, that's a challenge, and that means that you have to communicate both to your primary users, but also to decision makers and funding bodies. The way to communicate is to focus increasingly more on outcomes rather than just output. The important thing for us is not how many books we lend out, but how many children read books. It doesn't have to be books they borrowed from us, they just have to read. So we focus more on outcomes, and I think that's also the challenge for many of us libraries when we communicate to funding bodies. We need to tell the funding bodies the difference we make for users, not just the outputs we produce. Of course, these models can be combined, and then you would get a model like this. But my conclusion from thinking about that is that we have to develop our collaboration, starting with this unique space and what we are good at individually. And we have to develop the collaboration starting with the users, not with our collection. The collaboration in Denmark, for instance, with research libraries is on the collection, on interlibrary loans. We need to move to, for instance, supporting lifelong learning, to collaborate on e-learning. We should also have increased collaboration with national libraries on promotion and presentations of national collection to the general public, and we can also do that on special collections. I think we can learn a lot from museums and museum libraries about alternative forms of presentation and exhibitions. That's the unique thing they're very good at in this unique competing space. In terms of digital libraries, I think we could collaborate on citizens' involvement in some of the digital library initiatives. Of course, they're primarily meant to serve academics, but through open data initiatives or smart city initiatives that are coming in across Europe, I think we could do more to involve citizens. And actually, when I thought about, from these models, about the funding, I think also we could help each other on the funding thing, because if we collaborate, and if we collaborate starting with user needs, I think it would be easier to convince funding bodies why the individual library function is important. One example could be open access. I'm familiar with the open access debate in universities and across Europe, but actually the most important place where open access is a barrier is lifelong learning, and that's the public library users. So if we could take the open access debate and transfer it to a public library setting, I think we could support the funding claims on, for instance, an open data infrastructure. So I think the collaboration between our library types should be on very specific initiatives. And we should start with the user needs, and then I think we could also support each other. We can make them more high-profile initiatives, and we could support each other in the funding claims. In relation to, I think most of us have agreed that the focus on the user is important, and of course I also agree on that. But I think we should move one step further and say we should look at the user as a resource. It's important to involve the user, but I actually think that at one point I asked my staff that when they see a citizen coming in through the door, whether they see a person that needs help or somebody who could help the library. And actually we have a very well-educated population in Copenhagen, and they want to help. We already have, of course, students doing homework cafes for pupils in public schools, and we have homework cafes online also. But we can also use students in a lot of different ways. We did, for instance, at one time we did a session where we said we would like the best thesis students are doing on new media. And then we picked the best thesis, and then we said you get a quarter of an hour to present new media at the library, your thesis from new media from different perspectives. And then we had 100 other students coming from all over different educational institutions to discuss how to write a thesis, but also to discuss new media. And all we did was supply the coffee. So I think we should look at our users also as a resource. That's an important, and we could collaborate on that as well. My final point was, I think our main challenge is to remain or become a relevant part of the information environment of the target users. Some libraries are already there, but I think some of our users are moving away from the public libraries. We should discuss whether we should reinvent ourselves or insist on the traditional role or mandate of the library. And then we should be much better at translating activities into outcomes and focus on that as a way of generating support. We also need, and we see that across libraries, new KPIs and a greater focus on library advocacy, because I think libraries are being underfunded in many places. Yes, I won't go into the rest of it. I think I think the presentations and the papers have shown we have a great many areas of collaboration. I think we're already doing stuff in Denmark, but there's a lot of inspiration to take home from this conference. So thank you for that.
And now it's turn for Kaisa Sinikara to take the floor. You're the last speaker of the second round.
All these library models have a long history and rich history, but all libraries must look at the future. Some key terms could be keep in mind, like digital revolution, becoming smarter together, the library as a place of learning, open science, new services, and investment in staff. The digital revolution extends the service possibilities of the libraries. And I think the University Library of UCL and, for example, the Library of MoMA are very good examples about these new kind of services. But the library is flourishing as a place of learning and social gathering too. I have to correct the first point because I wrote it at home, and I didn't know about the delay of the Learning Resource Center, but we could say that the brand new Learning Resource Center of the University of Cyprus will be opened next year.
Yes, for sure.
And as I have heard about colleagues here, Paul told about the UCLA new digitally enabled learning spaces, which are very interesting, and I'm sure the students will love them. The new main library at the University of Helsinki was opened, as I already mentioned, in 2012, and it has been extremely popular. We expected about 5,000 visitors a day, but it's quite often 7,000 visitors a day or something. So it has been extremely popular and loved by the media as well. And I'd like to mention one other example about the library as learning and social gathering. A new main public library will be opened in Helsinki in 2018. The new library was selected as one of the main projects celebrating Finland's 100th anniversary, and it tells quite a lot about the Finnish cultural attitudes. Open science also requires new network services and solutions, of which OpenAir is a good example. Structures and services are needed which can connect actors to produce services in European networks and worldwide. What is the future of national libraries? The basic task of a nation's library to preserve the publishing heritage for future generations will remain an important task. The digital revolution adds challenges to the management of this task, but the National Library can also function as a national service center for memory organizations. The question is how to secure sufficient financing and the support of society for the work which focuses long into the future. The new slogan of the Copenhagen Public Libraries, "We get smarter together," is an excellent message for all of us. And Paul and Milan describe the strengthening cooperation between different partners inside the home organization. And I'd like to mention that most libraries of Europe are partners in several consortia and members of the cooperation networks, which are very important in and able to bring new tools for managing the changes of the large information landscape. The OpenAir project gathers European scientific libraries and researchers through the national open access desks. And Milan told about an interesting global image interoperability framework. In fact, lowering the borders between different types of institutions is not very easy. There can be quite a lot of challenges. We need vision and courage, common interests, and usually much patience, as well as funding and creation of financing models. But the border lines are very important because they can, and collaboration on the border lines is important because it's able to create totally new kind of solutions and ideas. The synergies involved can be economic advantages or higher effectiveness, or even opportunities to produce better quality from the point of view of social advantages. I think that one very important and interesting development is the digital humanities. Because we have nowadays a lot of digital materials, digitized or born digital material. But the important question is how researchers or students or other users are able to use extensive amounts of material and use them in the best way and to find totally new methods and new research problems in the digital world. This is quite interesting question, and some large university and national libraries have established special units for this purpose. Open access and open science create synergy. One example of shared open development outside the realm of libraries is the Linux operating system. Linus Torvalds was a Finnish student when he created the kernel, operating system kernel, which became the Linux kernel. And nowadays, and it created a global collaboration, free software development and so on. And nowadays the Linux is very, very large and used especially in Android smartphones, and it's I don't know how well you know it, but it's very well known, especially in leading operating system of servers and other complex systems such as mainframe computers and virtually all supercomputers. So open science, open development is essential. We need, when speaking about the management, we need strategic management, leadership, investment in staff competence, evidence-based decision-making, the proactive library and collaboration activities with customers. And I'd like to mention that the model of University Library of the UCL, University College London, is an excellent model, and I think it would be a good model for management of every library. But what is really important? An openness to experimentation, it's essential, as is the courage to make and to learn from mistakes and to build confidence together with stakeholders and staff members. And I think this is important, even there would be not one model operating everywhere. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.